The Venezuela becomes the center of a global dispute that threatens to turn Latin America into a war stage. Latin America is facing tensions not seen since the Cold War. Russia and the United States turned Venezuela into a focal point, mixing military power, oil, and political survival. What began as logistical support became a direct confrontation between two powers. With Russian operations underway and Donald Trump's reaction, the competition for influence became clear. Moscow sets up bases, sends weapons, and trains soldiers. Washington responds with ships, sanctions, and threats. Meanwhile, regional allies try to prevent a broader disaster. The conflict spreads, forcing nearby nations to choose between Russia and the United States in a dangerous standoff. The crisis spreads. Diplomatic spats with Colombia and Brazil, rising trafficking, and the return of a Trump-aligned right created a parallel war, political, economic, and informational. Each country must decide whether to back the United States or keep distance from the dispute with Russia. Everything suggests the standoff will be historic. Neither side wants to back down, and Venezuela became the central point of a new global conflict. The hybrid war started by Putin and answered by Trump could shift the global balance and push South America into a direct confrontation. Russia strengthens its military presence in Venezuela with instructors, advanced weapons, and imminent nuclear expansion plans. A blunt question: do you think there's a risk of a nuclear war in Latin America if Venezuela becomes a new Belarus under Putin? Also, do you believe Russia will establish a permanent presence in Venezuela? Just a reminder, this report is based on news from Sky News, The New York Times, BBC, The Guardian, Al Jazeera, Sputnik, RT News, and Telegram. But before we get into the video, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Your subscription means a lot and helps you stay updated on every story about the raging nations. And don't forget to give this video a thumbs up to help this project grow even more. Russia moved quickly. Some analysts claim Putin sent Wagner Group instructors and militiamen to Venezuela to reinforce Maduro and create a parallel force to the army. Moscow aims to build training and communication centers similar to those it maintains in Belarus, which many say stopped the American advance. Chinese analysts say the Russian operation is a model of hybrid warfare. It mixes military power, propaganda, and electronic technology. The Kremlin is testing a model of permanent presence outside Eurasia, using Caracas as an advanced base and challenging American hegemony in the Caribbean. Venezuelan military sources confirmed the arrival of Russian advisors specialized in artillery and air defense. It's suspected that short-range Iskander missiles, modernized Grad launchers, and Nebo-M radars capable of detecting stealth aircraft up to 300 kilometers away have arrived. The country is reaching a new military level. The Russian plan is to train both the army and the Bolivarian militias. Regular forces would receive technical and logistical support, while the militias would be responsible for internal security. All would answer to Russian officers permanently based in Venezuela, ensuring direct obedience to Moscow. Experts also say Putin is studying the deployment of the Oreshnik missile, which has intercontinental range, and the Poseidon nuclear torpedo, capable of generating radioactive tsunamis. If these weapons reach the Caribbean, the United States would see Venezuela as a new Belarus less than 1,000 kilometers from Florida. The arrival of missiles, tanks, and cargo planes turns the Caribbean into a zone of global tension. The model comes directly from Belarus, where Moscow keeps Su-35 fighters, Iskander missiles, tactical warheads, and T-90M tanks under joint command. Repeating this structure in South America would be the largest Russian nuclear expansion since the Cold War, completely changing the global strategic balance. To keep Maduro in power, Putin relies on the loyalty of Bolivarian generals. In exchange for weapons and protection, they guarantee the regime even amid sanctions and internal crisis. The deal includes billion-dollar oil and security contracts, making the partnership nearly unbreakable in the short term. Analysts see Russia testing the patience of the United States. Each Russian move in the Caribbean is accompanied by aerial maneuvers and disinformation campaigns. Trump responded by strengthening the American fleet in the region. Tensions are rising, and aerial and naval confrontations are getting closer. Meanwhile, China watches closely. The Chinese government analyzes the impact of sanctions and the American reaction, seeing in the Moscow-Caracas alliance an experiment in political expansion. This Sino-Russian military partnership could strengthen isolated regimes and shake Latin America's already fragile balance. The pace of events shows South America is turning into a testing ground. Each Russian cargo ship arriving in La Guaira raises the risk of direct confrontation. While Moscow quietly infiltrates, the United States prepares an offensive to contain Maduro. The coming scenes could change everything. American warships approach Venezuelan waters as Maduro mobilizes troops and the Caribbean nears open warfare. As everyone knows, American forces began moving into the Caribbean with state-of-the-art destroyers and aircraft carriers. Trump ordered the Atlantic Fleet to approach Venezuelan waters to intercept ships suspected of carrying Russian weapons. It's the largest U.S. military deployment in the region in decades. The world's media began questioning whether the United States had crossed the line. Venezuelan authorities speak of maritime violations and promise to respond with force if new ships enter their waters. The tension recalls the missile crisis days between the United States and Cuba in the 60s. Local reports show Venezuela reinforcing its coastal defense with Bastion missiles and mobile radars. Maduro promised to defend every inch of the country and ordered his troops to train with T-72 tanks and Su-30 Mk2 fighters. The atmosphere is one of total readiness, as if war could begin at any moment. Trump justified the military buildup by saying it responds to the continental communist threat. He reopened old bases in the Caribbean and reactivated a Cold War naval installation 800 kilometers from Venezuela. Everything suggests the president truly considers a large-scale invasion. Caracas responded by saying it had arrested a cell linked to the CIA that was planning a false attack to justify an invasion. The accusation fueled the crisis and strengthened the narrative that the United States seeks to overthrow Maduro at all costs. Whatever Trump does now could decide the fate of the entire continent. American bombers and drones surround Caracas, and the capital goes on high alert with tanks patrolling the streets. The rhetoric escalated. Washington said it does not want war but assured that Maduro's days are numbered. The Pentagon authorized the deployment of B-2 Spirit bombers and MQ-9 Reaper drones to bases in Puerto Rico and Curaçao, putting U.S. strike power just minutes from Caracas. Satellite images show columns of Venezuelan tanks moving to protect the capital. The population lives in panic over the possibility of invasion. Reports mention economic blockades, cyber attacks, and arrests of soldiers suspected of collaborating with foreigners. Tension rises by the hour. Trump insists on his "Liberate the Venezuelan People" speech, but analysts say the real goal is to prevent Russian weapons from reaching the country. The Pentagon fears each new shipment could strengthen Maduro and complicate an American offensive. Each day of delay brings direct confrontation closer. While the United States expands its troops, Russia increases shipments of ammunition and Panzer S-1 air defense systems. Il-76 cargo planes cross the Atlantic, and Russian ships reinforce the port of La Guaira. The situation grows tenser, and a single mistake could ignite a war across the hemisphere. The White House convened the National Security Council amid regional escalation, focusing on expanding counter-narcotics interdiction operations and deploying military assets in the Caribbean, according to recent media reports. American maritime attacks caused deaths and outrage in Caracas, which accuses Washington of violating national sovereignty. In recent weeks, the United States carried out attacks on vessels accused of transporting drugs near Venezuela, with confirmed casualties. The government justified the actions as part of a crackdown on maritime organized crime. Caracas condemned the U.S. naval and air operations, saying they violate Venezuelan sovereignty. Regional analysts warned the interdictions could raise the risk of incidents and miscalculations. At the same time, authorities and international outlets reported that Russia delivered air defense systems to Venezuela, including Panzer S-1 and Buk M2E, via Il-76 cargo planes, strengthening Caracas' air defense network. The United States strengthened its military presence in the Caribbean by deploying F-35 fighters to Puerto Rico and expanding naval drills, officially aimed at countering drug trafficking. The move heightened tensions with Maduro's government. In Moscow, lawmakers tied to the Defense Committee indicated new arms shipments to Caracas and did not rule out additional capabilities in the future, maintaining the perception of a gradual escalation in Russian support. The humanitarian crisis explodes at the borders, with thousands fleeing Venezuela as global agencies plead for aid. Reports of regular transfers of Russian military equipment gained strength after public mentions of Il-76 flights and the arrival of new air defense systems, consolidating a defensive increase in Venezuela observed by independent analysts. Maduro's government has used the rhetoric of defending sovereignty and showcased military training and readiness while criticizing Washington's militarization of the Caribbean region. International organizations warn of the humanitarian impact of an escalation. UN and OAS agencies highlight the pressure on Venezuelan refugees and migrants in the region, calling for coordination and protection. Tensions reached Trinidad and Tobago. After the arrival of a U.S. warship, Caracas suspended energy agreements with the country, deepening the diplomatic rift in the Caribbean. Think tanks and research centers warn of the risk of escalation. The combination of Russian military deliveries and U.S. counter-narcotics patrols creates an environment prone to incidents, with potential to deepen the crisis. Colombia falls into political chaos, Petro is isolated, and the border turns into a new battlefield. The conflict crossed borders. Colombia positioned troops along the border and requested military aid from the United States, while criminal factions took advantage of the chaos to expand trafficking. Washington labeled the entire region a potential war zone, and the escalation seemed irreversible. The Trump administration informed Congress that the country was already in armed conflict against international cartels. This authorized joint operations in jungle and coastal areas. Black Hawk helicopters and surveillance drones began flying over suspicious routes, including those near Brazilian territory. Colombia fell into crisis after Trump cut security subsidies. President Gustavo Petro was called the leader of continental drug trafficking, and American retaliation sparked riots in Bogota. The country plunged into instability, with clashes between army factions and armed groups. Luis Inacio Lula da Silva criticized Trump's military actions, calling them imperialist. In response, Washington suspended intelligence agreements. Brazil's political isolation grew amid regional tension. Later, Trump and Lula drew closer, but urban conflicts once again revealed deep differences between them. Rio de Janeiro became a symbol of division. After a police operation that killed hundreds of traffickers, Trump praised the direct fight against crime, while Lula said the dead were social victims. The clash between the two narratives made it clear the diplomatic crisis was restarting. Protests and clashes erupt across Latin capitals, splitting the continent between Washington's allies and Moscow-backed regimes. The ideological dispute spread throughout Latin America. Argentina, for example, moved closer to Washington. The continent split between conservative governments aligned with the United States and Bolivarian regimes seeking Russian and Chinese military support. Protests filled the streets in several capitals. The left denounced American intervention, while right-wing groups demanded tougher sanctions against Caracas. The continent plunged into political polarization and violence, with many comparing the moment to the darkest days of the old Cold War. Trump hardened his speech, suggesting that Latin America must choose between prospering with the United States or submitting to communism. His remarks went viral worldwide, accompanied by new naval maneuvers. Maduro responded by accusing Washington of preparing a coup disguised as liberation. In several South American countries, guerrillas reorganized with the help of Venezuelan militias. The U.S. Department of Defense stated that these groups were being trained by Russian instructors. In response, the United States increased aerial patrols over the Amazon, expanding its military presence in the region. Analysts say this ideological war reignited South America's old military dependency. The continent has become a testing ground for new hybrid warfare tactics. What comes next shows how this political and economic crisis threatens the entire hemisphere's stability. The trade blockade imposed by the United States plunges Latin America into recession, collapsing entire national economies. The diplomatic collapse led Washington to toughen its stance and expand the trade blockade. Latin American products were heavily taxed, and banks tied to Russian allied regimes were cut off from the U.S. system. The White House called this measure an economic war against narco-terrorism. The European Union tried to mediate talks, but Trump refused any negotiation. He said there's no dialogue with those who protect dictators. The region plunged into recession, exports plummeted, and countries like Brazil and Colombia could see their economies bleed amid the crisis. In Venezuela, American advances forced thousands of civilians to flee to Colombia. Putin promised to help during the crisis and sent Wagner Group planes with secret cargo that remains a mystery, ensuring Maduro's regime stays strong and allied with Moscow. Even amid the chaos, cocaine trafficking is soaring. Experts warn that this new golden age of narco-trafficking could fund regional wars and strengthen paramilitary groups across the continent. The Latin American right took advantage of the conflict to strengthen itself. Nationalist movements grew across several countries, defending full alliance with the United States. Meanwhile, progressive governments accuse Washington of trying to recolonize the continent. What comes next may define the region's political future, and peace is far from guaranteed. Instability grips the continent, fear spreads, and analysts warn that total war draws dangerously close. With the military, economic, and political escalation, the continent entered a dangerous cycle of instability. The United States keeps troops on alert, Russia maintains forces in Venezuela, and Latin America lives under constant fear that the next move from either side could spark total war. UN reports show an alarming rise in refugees and human rights violations. The humanitarian crisis in Venezuela breaks records, and sanctions make aid delivery difficult. Small Caribbean nations now face pressure to choose between supporting Washington or Moscow, and either choice comes at a cost. Behind the scenes, Trump seeks a way out that doesn't look like retreat. Some advisors want dialogue with Moscow, but he fears appearing weak. Meanwhile, Putin demands the complete withdrawal of US forces before any talks, keeping nuclear tension at its highest point since the Cold War. Exhausted and divided, Latin America watches decades of diplomacy crumble. Military alliances have replaced cooperation, and the fear of a continental war dominates the scene. Many wonder if there's still time to prevent the Caribbean from becoming the new epicenter of a global conflict. Today, it became clear how Putin and Trump placed Venezuela at the center of a dispute that revived ghosts of the past. From the arrival of the Wagner Group to American bombings, the continent is living days reminiscent of the Cold War, but now with far greater risk and global reach. Russia's presence with missiles and troops turns Venezuela into a strategic base and revives nuclear confrontation fears. The Russian presence with missiles, submarines, and troops changed the region's balance. Trump responded with attacks, sanctions, and an aggressive strategy to contain Moscow. South America became a stage for military and political tests, where every move is closely watched by major powers. As the conflict spread, trade and diplomatic relations collapsed. The economic blockade, rising trafficking, and export decline reveal an unprecedented crisis. Now, no country can remain neutral. All are forced to choose a side in this global dispute. The Venezuelan crisis became the breaking point that could help change the world. The possibility of Russian nuclear weapons, so close to the United States, reignited debates about international security and the future of Latin America itself. The atmosphere is filled with fear, and global balance grows increasingly fragile. Now, a question for the brave ones. Do you believe the world could witness a nuclear war in Latin America if Putin turns Venezuela into his new Belarus? Tell me also if you believe Russia will establish a permanent presence in Venezuela. Thanks so much for sticking around until the end of the video. You're awesome, and I really appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any updates on the raging nations. And don't forget to give this video a thumbs up to help this project grow even more.